My wife recently told me she's pregnant, but I know I'm not the father because I'm sterile. I'm going along with it for now. I got married to my wife, who is 33, 2 years ago. We'd been dating for 3 years, and she was more inclined towards marriage than I was. However, I agreed to marry her around a year ago, and we started trying to have a baby again, which was at her insistence. We struggled a lot during that period. During the period that we were trying to conceive, things got pretty rough for my mental health. I decided to get tested because my wife had become pretty mean during that time. I tried to deal with her behavior, but it was just too much to bear. A few days after the test, I was told by the doctors that I was sterile. That pretty much broke my heart, even though having a baby wasn't my idea. I'd already started thinking about what it would be like to be a dad. So when I found out I'd never be able to be one, it was the most devastating news at the time. But the worst was yet to come. I've been trying to work up the courage to tell my wife that I was the reason we couldn't conceive. But I was afraid of how she'd react. She'd already been so mean to me that I couldn't imagine how she'd react when she found out that having a baby with me was probably never going to happen. So I waited a few days after I got the results of my test to tell her. But she ended up giving me a surprise 4 days later. She sat me down and told me that she had some really important news to share with me. I was extremely scared because I thought that I was shocked when my wife told me she was pregnant. I was even more shocked when I found out she'd found out about my sterility. Thankfully, she was unaware of my true feelings and began to celebrate almost immediately. I tried to join in on her happiness so that she wouldn't doubt me, but the very next day I got tested again just to confirm that I was sterile. Once again, I received the same results. I was at a loss because if I wasn't the father, then my wife was most certainly cheating on me. The medical procedures that she needed to conceive artificially were expensive, and since I was the only one bringing home the money between the two of us, she couldn't have gotten anything done without asking me for that sort of money first, so she was obviously cheating. The thought itself was so weird and horrible that I didn't do anything about it for the next few days while my wife planned she threw a big party to announce her pregnancy. She seemed really happy, and I was equally shattered. But I couldn't let it show on my face because I needed to get to the bottom of this whole situation. I didn't even tell my own family about what was happening and kept it all under wraps because this was way too uncomfortable and personal to be shared with anyone. I couldn't even tell my wife what I thought because firstly, way too much time had passed, and secondly, I wanted to know who the father of her child was because if I did confront her, then maybe she'd just leave and I'd never know. Luckily, I found out on the day of the party itself. A lot of people attended, including our families, our friends, and a few of my coworkers. She also invited one of our neighbors, who lived right across the street from us. Our neighbor is a young man and is definitely a lot better looking than me, no doubt. He's not just better looking than most people, he's a model. He's still trying to make a name for himself in the modeling world. He moved in with his aunt, who owns the house he lives in, so he'd be closer to the city. His own family lives really far away. My wife has always had a soft spot for this guy. She'd cook for him and his aunt when he first moved in. He even came over to our house for dinner a few times, and we've chatted about his work. He's well-spoken and well-read, and he's also a literature major like my wife, so they have a lot in common and hit it off instantly the first time they met. I never had anything against the guy since he seemed sweet enough, and I trusted my wife too. But when he entered the house on the day of our party, my wife's eyes lit up. I could tell something had changed. She made a beeline for him as soon as he walked in, and they hugged each other for longer than she'd hugged any of the other guests. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I did. I could tell they had something brewing, but I just needed a way to confirm it. So I excused myself to go to the L, but headed to the bedroom instead and opened up my wife's laptop. I was able to check her phone while she was asleep a few days after she told me she was pregnant, but I hadn't found anything suspicious. Getting to her laptop had proved to be a little more difficult since she was always watching something or typing something on it whenever I was home. Whenever I'd ask her what she was doing, she'd turn the screen away from me and tell me that she was working on her novel, which had been going on for months. I respected her privacy because I'd actually thought she was working on a novel, but the situation had changed, and I was pretty sure there was no novel. It was just an excuse to hide the contents of her laptop from me. Thankfully, there was no password or anything. I had easy access to it, so I did some digging and found another email account in addition to the one she used for work. I switched to that one and went through the emails that had been sent and received. I went through those emails, and the emails were full of confessions of love from my wife and also from the other guy, our neighbor. I recognized the email address since he was using his real name. In the more recent emails, she was telling him that she was pregnant. He didn't take it kindly and was upset about it, so the mail stopped for a while, presumably because he wanted to end things. But my wife wasn't going to let him go. Eventually, I got the worst email of them all, where she was telling him that I spoke to a friend of hers who is a lawyer, and she said she'd help her file for divorce right after the baby is born. She even tried to convince me to have a baby with her so she'd get both alimony and child support after the divorce. She wanted to take off with our neighbor a few months after and live happily ever after. I was pretty shocked when I read that, and I can still feel sick to my stomach thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about that email. I quickly shook off whatever I was feeling and got back to work. I took several pictures of the email on my phone before shutting it down and putting it back where I found it. I was less concerned about the cheating and more disgusted by what my wife was trying to do. Cheating was one thing, but trying to trick me into having a child with her and then making me pay all that money just so she could fund her dream life with her struggling boyfriend was pretty out there. And the icing on the cake was that she was such a great actress that I hadn't suspected a thing. Her happiness was almost disturbing, but I was so angry about all of this that I decided to go the extra mile and take my revenge. I made up my mind to play along, and then I dropped the bomb on her when she was least expecting it. There was no way I was going to let her just get away with it. I was hurt, betrayed, and frustrated when I found out about her dishonesty. I know it sounds crazy, but I did what I had to do. For the next 9 months, I played the perfect husband and father-to-be. It was tough knowing that she was lying to me the whole time, but the more she lied and pretended to be happy with me, the more determined I became to see this through. I attended every meeting with her. I made sure her doctor gave her all the vitamins she needed and was the best husband I could be. Then, a few days ago, my wife went into labor. I was nervous because it wasn't my situation, but I put that aside and took her to the hospital by myself. I'd already called her parents, but not mine, since I didn't want them there in case things got too dramatic. Her parents had to drive for an hour to get there. We had some time to ourselves while we waited for her parents to arrive, so I decided to tell her the news. I told her that I was going to call our neighbor so he could be there for her. She seemed surprised and stuttered a bit, while saying that there was no need for that, and she didn't want a stranger in the room while giving birth. I smiled back at her and showed her the results of my fertility test and the divorce papers. Since I'd filed for divorce just a few days before her due date, I'd made sure to carry them with me on that day. She was still looking confused, so I explained that I wouldn't be able to impregnate her even if I'd wanted to. The baby wasn't mine. Then I told her about the emails that I'd found on her super-secret account. At that moment, she finally realized what was going on. The look on her face was priceless as I walked out and she struggled to come up with words. I thought I'd need to stay in the hospital myself too because that's how fast my heart was beating when I finally walked out and called our neighbor to inform him that my wife was in labor. I didn't even wait for his response and hung up as fast as I could. Then I got into my car and waited for my wife's family to show up. As soon as I saw her dad's car pull up in the driveway, I got out of there as fast as I could. I even turned my phone off for good measure and drove for a while until I got to a motel a little out of town. I had already packed my bags a few weeks ago and had them stashed in the boot of my car, so I had everything I needed with me. I spent the rest of the day watching TV, drinking beer, and doing whatever I could to take my mind off things. I went to sleep that night quite peacefully, knowing that I was finally done with this whole act. The next morning, I woke up and finally turned my phone on. There were hundreds of texts from my wife and my neighbor, but I didn't open them. I did, however, go through some texts from my parents and brother. I got a bunch of messages from my wife's contacts, who couldn't reach me. I decided to call my parents back and speak to them. I told them I'd be back home soon and asked them to get my brother there if possible. I wanted to explain the situation to them because they deserved to know what was going on. I drove to my parents' house, and my brother was already there. They looked confused and annoyed. I told them I'd missed the birth of my child, which made them miss the birth of their grandchild. I sat them down and explained the whole story, including my reasons for what I'd done. By the time I was done, they were speechless. I was ready for questions and accusations, but nothing happened. My dad said he hoped nothing worse would happen. My family didn't have much to say, but my wife has been calling and texting nonstop. She's been upset since I left, even though I haven't answered. My neighbor texted me a few hours ago to say she was really upset. He also said that we should try to sort things out with her for once, for her sake. I can't believe the nerve of these people, still trying to talk to me and making it seem like this is some minor issue that I'm getting upset about. He mentioned a couple of other things in his text, too, like how my wife had started to fall back in love with me during her pregnancy, which had been a surprise for both of them. I guess I should at least try to give our marriage a second chance. I called BS on it because if she'd started to fall for me again, then why was my neighbor still in the picture? I don't know why they think I'm that stupid. My wife is upset, but there's nothing I can do about it. She's mostly angry that I've known everything right from the beginning but had chosen to be with her and put up with this whole act. She also accused me of lying to her and of staying with my wife throughout her pregnancy and misleading her despite knowing that the baby wasn't mine and that she'd been cheating on me with our neighbor. I'm accused of lying to her and of staying with my wife throughout her pregnancy and misleading her despite knowing that the baby wasn't mine and she'd been cheating on me with our neighbor. It's been close to a week since the baby was born, and I've been staying in a hotel room. I haven't been over to see my wife yet, and I don't plan on going either. She's still texting and calling me, but I don't know what to do. I haven't blocked her yet, but I have blocked my neighbor. He'd taken it upon himself to text me and remind me that my wife was still holding out hope and wanted me to get back to her. I'm 100% sure that the only reason he's still with her and trying to get me to forgive her is so that I'll at least get something out of the divorce settlement and the alimony since both of them are basically unemployed. My wife was a stay-at-home spouse, which I appreciated and respected, but she wasn't just staying at home and doing the chores. She was also cheating on me behind my back, which I found unforgivable. Before anyone attacks me, I'm not the one who suggested that she quit her job after marriage. In fact, I was quite supportive of her back when we were dating. When we were dating, she worked, but she said she wanted to quit and take care of our home instead. I supported her decision because it was her choice, and I earned enough to support us anyway. I'm confident my lawyer will be able to get me out of paying alimony once we can prove she was cheating, which should be easy to do. My neighbor is still struggling to find work, paying modeling gigs, handling his own expenses, my wife's expenses, and a baby on top of that is going to be next to impossible for them even with all their money combined. I wish them well, but I'm just grateful that I'm out of this mess and won't have to give them anything, not even my attention. I just hope that my wife realizes that and doesn't waste more of my time by contesting the divorce. She probably won't, but then again, given the lack of brains she's shown so far, who knows? I'm prepared for that, too. The pictures of the emails that had been exchanged on her secret email account are still safely saved on my phone and backed up on my laptop. So I'm not too worried even if she decides to delete her account. She cannot delete those images that I have, and I know I'll be good to go. Worst comes to worst, I'll even pay her. I'm not paying alimony, but at least I won't have to be with her. She should count herself lucky. I'm giving her time to vacate our house. Since the house is registered under my name, I've evicted her. I'm hoping for the best now and that this will blow over soon. I was right. My wife's an idiot. She's decided to negotiate since she wasn't happy with the settlement that I'd offered. It was just the amount she'd spent during the marriage, which felt pretty generous to me. I don't even understand what she thinks is going to happen. But whatever. She texted me yesterday saying she'd vacated the house. So I went back, thinking she'd probably moved in with her parents. I was super disappointed to learn she just moved across the street into our neighbor's house. I'd still have to see her and her boyfriend's faces every single day. I even considered going back to living in a hotel, but decided against it. This was my house and I had every right to live wherever I wanted to. I wasn't going to pack up and go just because they were making me uncomfortable. I did wonder why my wife hadn't gone to live with her parents instead, since living with our neighbor was going to negatively impact the divorce case. She was just making things worse for herself, but I didn't have to think too hard because while going through all the unread messages I'd received from multiple people, I also noticed one from my wife's father. I hadn't responded to several people who had texted me in the past few days, and his message had also gotten lost in the shuffle. It was a long text about how sorry he was regarding what his daughter had done and told me that her father was saying these things, so it meant a lot to me and validated my emotions. I was so moved that I could feel tears coming on, but I held them back. He apologized for my wife's behavior and told me that he'd cut her off since she told him that she wanted to contest the divorce. So far, nothing that my wife was doing made any sense to me at all. I knew it would all backfire eventually. Someone like her had the good sense to realize that either she's just really stupid or she still has some tricks up her sleeve. I'm hoping it's not the latter, but then I wouldn't put it past her. She is pretty much the worst. This living arrangement is definitely going to lead to some complications, and I'm sure they'll try to make me uncomfortable or jealous, but I'm determined not to let them get under my skin. They'll probably try to provoke me because they know it'll get under my skin. All things considered, I'm still saving a fortune since I don't have to live in a hotel. It's been a month since the negotiations for my divorce settlement began, and so far it's going pretty badly for my wife. I've been able to prove that she'd been cheating on me. So it's been a month since the negotiations for my divorce settlement began. So far, things aren't going well for my wife. I've been able to prove that she was cheating on me. She even made my job easier by moving in with the guy I accused her of cheating on me with. There's no doubt about the validity of my claims. She tried to make up some false accusations about how I was an alcoholic. That's also why I was sterile. That's why she had an affair. Since we were trying to conceive, I'd become pretty harsh and resentful towards her. However, that was quickly disproved since everyone knew I'd quit drinking last year when we decided to start trying for a baby and haven't touched alcohol since. I'm not sure why she thought that would work, but it was pretty foolish of her. I guess she was just grasping at straws since her initial plan had failed miserably and now she was too. She was busy being a mother and trying to be a master manipulator. She was too busy, and her baby daddy was too stupid. We both know there's no way she'll get any alimony. I bet she told her boyfriend that a few days ago. She was kicked out of his house with her baby. Yeah, that's right. I heard a lot of screaming and shouting from their house. Then, within minutes, I saw my wife and her son being pushed out of the house. The father was screaming at her and calling her names. I was watching all of this happen from my living room. The second I saw him shove my wife out while she was carrying the baby, I rushed out to help. I didn't care who was involved. I couldn't let a poor innocent baby suffer for something that wasn't even his fault. I couldn't let the baby suffer for something that wasn't even his fault. By the time I reached his doorstep, he'd already slammed it shut while my wife and her son were both sobbing. I carried the baby and grabbed my wife's hand so that I could lead them back to my house across the street. Then I called my father-in-law so that he could take her home within an hour. He showed up and took her away once again. She thanked me for all that I'd done during that 1 hour. My wife had been crying too, so I'd basically been calming both mother and child down. I wanted to call the cops as well, but she managed to persuade me to let it go since she didn't want more trouble. She was apologizing again and again for whatever had happened and told me that she'd been so desperate to be with the one she said she lost all her self-respect and morals and was truly sorry. She told me she'll accept whatever happens and isn't going to negotiate anymore. So the divorce is finalized faster. I guess that's one good thing. Hopefully, she'll decide to press charges eventually and heal herself as well. But at least I did whatever I could and was a decent person. I don't regret anything.